At 2:30 p.m. local time, high over the shifting blue vastness of the South China Sea, an American helicopter cut a steady path across the humid sky, doing something that, whether Washington intended it or not, made Beijing very, very nervous. To the untrained eye, it looked like a routine patrol, a grey-painted U. Navy MH-60R Seahawk cruising at medium altitude, rotors thumping with the deep, confident rhythm of American naval aviation. But, to China's Southern Theater Command, that helicopter was a threat. A pair of sensors on its fuselage, barely noticeable to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at, were enough to trigger alarms across multiple Chinese command posts. And so Beijing scrambled one of its best attack helicopters to intercept it. AZ-10, China's pride in rotary wing attack aviation, clawed its way into the sky from Xiamen Air Base. Its pilot, a captain with nearly 600 flight hours and a reputation for following orders with more enthusiasm than judgment, was told one thing: scare off the Americans. He had no idea that he was about to make the worst mistake of his career. Over the next 72 minutes, while trying to intimidate the most powerful navy on Earth, he would accidentally hand the United States something Beijing never wanted them to have. The American crew, 2 pilots and a sensor operator, could not have looked more relaxed. The MH-60R, often called the Swiss Army knife of naval aviation, was in the middle of an anti-submarine sweep. Below them, somewhere under the rolling surface, a Chinese Type 039 diesel-electric submarine was attempting something it absolutely had to do: recharge. Diesel subs are powerful tools in shallow coastal waters, but they have a biological weakness. They must breathe. After 48 hours submerged on battery power, it needed to snorkel, and America was watching. The first sign of Beijing's displeasure crackled over the radio, thin and distorted by distance. Foreign military aircraft, you are approaching Chinese territorial waters. Alter your course immediately. The message was delivered with the tone of someone confident in their authority. The problem was simple. The Americans were nowhere near Chinese waters. They were 50 nautical miles from any disputed island, flying in undisputed international airspace, where they had every legal right to be. Seconds later, the Z-10 appeared a dark silhouette sweeping across the Romeo's nose at roughly 500 meters, banking aggressively as if to slice the air right in front of the Americans. Inside the US helicopter, nobody flinched. Nobody even paused the operation. They knew something Beijing didn't. Every electronic pulse coming off that Chinese helicopter was being sucked into the MH-60R like oxygen into a furnace. Those bumps and bulges along the Seahawk's frame ALQ-210 electronic support measure pods were not decoration. They were digital vacuum cleaners, vacuuming up radar frequencies, communication protocols, engine harmonics, and every electronic whisper the Z-10 emitted. The Chinese pilot believed he was projecting strength. In reality, he was a walking data leak. The Z-10 itself was an oddity of Chinese military technology. It looked fierce, angular, and sharp, much like the American Apache it had been modeled after. But looks can lie. The helicopter was born from 1,992nd's Russian design assistants, built during a period where Moscow needed cash and Beijing needed aviation experience. It resembled an Apache the way a heavily modified Toyota Camry resembles a race car. It could be intimidating if you didn't know better. The Chinese pilot, determined to make his presence known, fired off 2 flares that streaked past the Romeo like burning comets. They weren't weapons, just theatrics, the aviation equivalent of a chihuahua barking at a pit bull. The Americans replied by simply lowering their dipping sonar back into the sea, broadcasting a calm, unmistakable message: "We still see your submarine." Below them, the Type 039 crew heard the sonar ping and panicked. They crash-dived, triggering a symphony of noise cavitation from the sudden descent, hull creaks from rapid pressure changes, confused internal alarms. Across the entire U.S. carrier strike group, acoustic sensors lit up. In submarine warfare, silence is life. Noise is death. The Chinese pilot, in his attempt to protect the submarine, had just handed the US Navy its location on a silver platter, 18 minutes into this failed intimidation dance, the Z-10 pilot finally thought he had achieved something. His fire control radar gave him a lock on the Romeo. The warbling tone in his headset signaled success, an imaginary engagement, a simulated victory. For 3 seconds, he allowed himself to believe he had outmaneuvered the Americans. Then the U.S. stopped laughing and flipped a switch. From several miles away, an EA-18G Growler unleashed a burst of electromagnetic energy using its ALQ-99 jamming pods. The effect was instantaneous. The Chinese pilot's radar dissolved into chaos, static, ghost targets, impossible readings. The American helicopter fractured into a dozen phantom blips. Some looked like they were flying backward. One appeared to teleport. One even showed up inside the Z-10 itself. This was the difference between modern American electronic warfare and 1,990 seconds Russian leftovers. The ALQ-99 didn't just jam radars. It made them hallucinate. It hopped frequencies so quickly that while the Chinese radar looked for the jamming signal in one band, the Growler had already moved across 50 others. Then, things escalated. The pilot's threat display bloomed with new signatures. The powerful gaze of multiple spy radars from the US carrier strike group had just locked onto him. To any pilot, this was the equivalent of a spotlight turning on in a dark room. You suddenly realize you're not the hunter, you're the prey. The Z-10 pilot tried everything, switching frequencies, increasing power, resetting systems, toggling modes. Nothing worked. His electronics were being peeled apart like layers of an onion. Meanwhile, the American crew remained calm. Too calm. They were probably discussing fuel reserves and dinner plans. 4 minutes later, they sent another subtle message. The Romeo banked ever so slightly, dipping its sonar again. The submarine below tried to evade, turning sharply, its propeller screaming in protest. Each maneuver made it louder, more visible acoustically. The helicopter overhead could have tracked it with sonar alone, even if it had been blindfolded. Finally, the American aircraft commander sent a radio message, his tone polite and professional in the way only someone with overwhelming advantage can be. Chinese military aircraft. This is United States Navy aircraft, operating in international airspace in accordance with international law. We will maintain course and altitude. Translation was unnecessary, but the meaning was clear. We're not going anywhere. The Americans continued collecting data, mountains of it, and the Chinese pilot continued providing it. With every aggressive maneuver, the Z-10 broadcast its own weaknesses. The Romeo's sensors recorded everything. The maximum turn rate, the drop in speed during tight banks, the thermal bloom of its engines straining at full power. The Z-10's exhaust glowed at 450 degrees Celsius. Its transmission housing burned at 180. Every hotspot would become a future missile aiming point. The Chinese pilot, growing frustrated, closed to 500 meters, a reckless distance in this environment. Now he could see the American door gunner manning the GAU-21 50 caliber machine gun. The barrel wasn't pointed at him, but the implication was unmistakable. One pull of the trigger, and the Z-10 would be reduced to airborne confetti. He attempted more aggressive maneuvers, lunges, left, sudden climbs, sharp dives. These were meant to force the Romeo to react, to create a tactical mistake. Instead, the Z-10 bled speed, strained its airframe, and ran its engines far beyond their comfortable limits. The American helicopter, built on the battle-proven Black Hawk frame, easily outperformed it in stability and G-load tolerance. Meanwhile, the Z-10's internal systems began to fall apart. Hydraulic pressure dipped. Transmission temperatures soared. Warnings blinked across the cockpit like a Christmas tree in a hurricane. The pilot muted them out of necessity, but the problems didn't go away. His helicopter was physically wearing itself out. He attempted 14 radar locks, 14 failures, 14 gifts to American intelligence teams. Each failed lock provided electronic fingerprints, pulse patterns, frequency hops, modulation quirks that U.S. analysts would later use to defeat every radar of that model. When he switched to his laser targeting system, The Romeo detected not just the beam, but the exact model and software version behind it. With that knowledge, the U could now jam or spoof not just this helicopter, but every Chinese system using the same architecture. By now, the Z-10 was cooking itself. Its engines hit 105% maximum continuous power. The infrared signature doubled. The MH-60R's FLIR camera captured every second. Future American missiles would be programmed accordingly. Communication intercepts revealed the biggest secret of all. China's frequency-hopping encryption pattern. Predictable, repetitive, vulnerable. The entire theater's communication networks were now compromised by one overeager helicopter pilot who pushed too close for too long. At 3:42 p.m., 72 minutes after this interaction began, the Z-10 pilot watched the Romeo's sonar re-enter the water. The submarine he thought he was protecting was still being tracked. He had accomplished nothing. He hovered for a long moment, thumb near the transmit button, wondering how to explain this to ground control. But he knew the truth. They had seen it all. The radar picture told the whole story. The Americans turned north, continuing their patrol without a hint of concern. The Z-10, overheated and humiliated, turned back toward Xiamen. In 72 minutes, the U.S. Navy had collected enough intelligence to refine jamming protocols, update missile guidance algorithms, and rewrite engagement tactics for an entire class of Chinese aircraft. The message to Beijing was unspoken but unmistakable. If this is your best, you're not ready. And as the Romeo disappeared into the horizon, leaving nothing behind but the fading echo of its rotors, one fact became clear. China thought it sent a warning. Instead, it sent a lesson, a very expensive one.